All right, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the December Expert Webinar Series with Golden Shovel Agency. I wanted to welcome the holiday season to everybody that's celebrating coming up here over the next few weeks, and certainly a Happy New Year to groups coming up for the first of the year. So we have a very, very special guest today. Very excited to present Hassan Syed. He's the CEO of Burr Ventures USA, and he's the founder of IdeaGist. Hassan and I met each other kind of recently. He was working on both a digital acceleration program as well as workshops for preparing economic development organizations with all of the upcoming technological changes that are going to be affecting their jobs and especially the workforce of rural communities. And I found that we had a lot in common. I got really interested in what he's been working on, and this is really a treat to be able to share with everybody. Hassan is the founding director of IdeaGist. He's also the founding director of Minnesota Innovates and the founding director of the Institute for Innovators and Entrepreneurs at Hamline University, Minnesota. His story was recently published by Green Card Voices in their book, Green Card Entrepreneurs. He's also recognized by Pollen and AARP Minnesota as one of the 50 most inspiring and accomplished leaders across Minnesota. I'm just really happy to have you here today, Hassan, and let me introduce you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Really, really appreciate it. It's a great opportunity to talk about some of the learning that we had along the way. So I would love to share some of our journey, what we did and how do we see the digital side of on a startup ecosystem. So that's my presentation today. So welcome everyone. Same thing, best wishes for the holiday season and, upcoming New Year. Very happy New Year for everyone. I'm going to give you a very quick brief on, the background of why do I even talk about this. And then we will talk about the big picture, why it matters to understand the digital DNA of a startup ecosystem. We will have a peek inside the startup ecosystem as other people are presenting those pictures, and you may find them very familiar. And then from my perspective, making sense, as a digital, from digital perspective, making sense out of those pictures and how we can arrange them in in the simple ABCD of a DNA. Then we will have some question and answers, and after the question and answers, I'm going to share with you another reason to think digital, which is not in the beginning I'm talking about. So there's something that I really closer to my heart also. So I'm going to share that in the end. So that's roughly the plan, and I think that I will take maybe 25 to 30 minutes tops. Aaron, how much time do we have?
We have up to 55 minutes, so we have plenty of time. Then we can take some questions. I'm sure there'll be some questions related to what you're presenting.
Awesome. So that's perfect. So you guys will have a lot of time to ask questions. Maybe get ready for that. Okay.
Oh, yeah. And Hassan, I didn't go through the actual just rules of the webinar. If you guys do have questions, feel free to enter them in the question panel over on the right side of the Zoom. And we'll ask those after you get through your presentation, Hassan. So feel free to type those in on the side, and we'll put those at the end. Everybody is muted. So,
okay.
All right, take it away.
All righty. Thank you. So just my company, IdeaGist, is a digital incubation platform. Our goal is to help communities with the incubation. Myself, I'm the founder of IdeaGist.com. And as Aaron mentioned, a few other things. One thing I would like you to know that I'm a technology person, and for 30 more years, I had been developing larger scale digital solutions for companies and communities all over the world. And so when I'm looking at anything, I will try to make the digital sense out of it. And that's, that's my area of expertise. IdeaGist, and I'm so glad to announce this today because it happened yesterday, that we crossed 50,000 user mark yesterday. So that's a celebration. So I've updated this morning. And so we are 50,000 plus innovators, entrepreneurs, and collaborators all over the world that are working on 3,200 ideas with 1,500 mentors in 350 communities and in all 195 countries. So this is like, a good foundation for us to kind of experiment a few things. So let's talk about the big picture, why, this is important. And I'm going to tell you a few things. Most probably you already know. It's very highly likely that you already know most of it. But it's good to remember, when we talk about a startup, they contribute to the economy. And there are lots of different reasons or ways that they can contribute. They create employment, taxes, technological transfer, third-party services, talent acquisition, foreign investments. It's, all sort of different things that happen because of this startup. And this is why everybody in the world, when it comes to economic development, is startups considered to be an important part of that puzzle. When we look at the startups, for example, in Minnesota, actually the state of a startup is not very good, with the exception of few ecosystems that we all know which ones. We don't need to name them, but they are pretty much on their own, and they are very healthy, startup ecosystems. But you take them out, and then you look at the rest of this country, you will see this. This is Minnesota, 12,000 startups and roughly 12,000 exits. So basically, the net effect is almost zero. Is the growth is stalled. So the question is that, if the exits are because they left Minnesota, or the exits are because they don't exist anymore and they died, can we basically increase their survival rate? And how do we do that? So there is a very good formula to increase the survival rate. This is the INBIA study, with the University of Michigan, I think, to basically startups that do not get incubation support actually twice as likely to die than those who are getting incubation support. So you can say, incubation can help those startups, and that can play an important role within an ecosystem to provide, a healthy supply of startups during, through that. However, it's a good thinking, but really there is no capacity. So if you look at the overall national capacity of incubators, which is claimed to be 50,000, but that's really actually very high number. The reality would be closer to 25, 30,000. An incubator, and we will talk about a little bit more on that model, but you need to understand that the average number of startups that any community can create is roughly 140 per 100,000 population. That is the US average. An incubator or accelerator hosts on average of 20 to 30 startups. Actually, the national average is 18, but of course now things are getting better with shared offices and all that. And the US roughly has got total installed capacity of 1,500. This is, so 90% or more actually cannot go in an incubator and cannot get help. So then you ask yourself the question, how can we help those startups? One idea is, let's go and build more incubators. And, the building cost of an incubator averages roughly $5 million that can help 20 businesses over a 24 months period. Cost of capital for space is $150,000. Operating losses averages $200,000. So to support 20 businesses for 24 months, an incubator would roughly cost $700,000, or maybe a little less, $600,000 or $500,000 over a period of 2 years. And that normally comes from the public funding. And unfortunately, majority of the rural communities, the smaller communities, do not have that kind of financial strength to provide, this kind of model. And that's where the problem lies. This is why we need to look at digital transformation of the startup ecosystems to see how digital, facilities can augment and can increase either the efficiency and effectiveness of the existing resources, and can also augment the resources where they're not available. So that's why it is important for us to look at the digital DNA of a startup ecosystem, because once we understand that, then we can start looking into digital systems that can actually support the whole ecosystem. Why it matters to us, to IdeaGist, we started this organization with a social purpose, and that was to help underprivileged and underserved communities, entrepreneurs from those communities, to be able to start their startups and get help as much as we can provide. So this is a topic that is very close to our hearts, to understand how these systems are working and how that help can be provided. Especially, I'll give you an example. In Minnesota, the angel investor network is fairly weak or non-existent, especially when it comes to technology startups and investing in technology startups. Traditional startups may be fine. If I'm starting a brewery, I can raise money. Or if I'm starting a restaurant, I can raise money. But if I'm starting a technology startup, chances are fairly minimum. So the way it can be looked at is that, if I can connect to Silicon Valley angel investors and somehow created a network between the Silicon Valley angel investors and the entrepreneurs over here, then I can augment our local capacity by supplying them some extra investors. So that's, that's why it is important. Okay. Now, the next few slides, I'm going to talk about what is inside a startup ecosystem. And these pictures will be very familiar because you guys are already aware of these. So I'm just gonna, quickly look into those and move on. This is the most famous, the most used picture because it is on Wikipedia. And, pretty much everybody who is in this field have seen it at least once, which talks about a startup ecosystem being created with the players which are around the circle and the services that are, provided inside that. So this is very common exercise, but it has come from academic background actually. So a lot of it is considering the academic, side of it. So, but you can see pieces of the ecosystem in this picture. Another picture that you may have seen other places, which is the economic development perspective, is how, different players are, are kind of connected, or the economic development people are holding all of them together in an ecosystem. So that's basically the incubator, the accelerators, angels, VCs, startups, service providers. Everybody is meshed, in that network. And economic development people normally are the catalysts, are the people who are facilitating a lot of that connectivity, and then a lot of it is organic that happens, in the ecosystem. Another picture, and that is basically defining the environment in which ecosystems, can thrive. So this is more of a larger scale picture of how you create an environment. So the government policy, the regulatory framework, funding and finance, culture, and a lot of other things that would play a role in creating that environment. So if you look at all these three pictures, you will realize that all these three pictures identifying soft or intangible benefits of things that can be contributed. The problem with that is that they are very difficult to measure in any particular way. And there are lots of different ways that there's some measurements are available. But, the systematic connection between each and each other in a quantifiable way doesn't exist. Or at least in the academic world, there is so much debate about it that, right now, even you can debate about, is there really something called a startup ecosystem? And so, it's a very early stage of our evolutionary thinking around this topic. Just keeping in mind that the incubators and accelerators are only 30, 40 years old. And, and the whole concept of looking at this, ecosystem is fairly new for humankind. So we are still grappling with that. I really like this one. This is another picture. But the cool thing about this picture is that it is a systematic view of what you at the ground create as the basic elements, or the conditions which produce certain things that eventually create the outcomes. So this is really cool, at least for my kind of brain, because I can at least now see the outcomes. However, those outcomes are not very clearly still connected with the cause, what is causing the outcome. There is a collective thing. And so you still need to look at individual pieces and, and start thinking about how would you quantify some of these things. So if it's a systematic condition, leadership, what does it mean, right? So, that's where you start thinking, within what is available to you in your ecosystem. So, a lot of these pictures, if you go and search on Google, I'm sure you'll find another 1,000 pictures like that. So we, 3 years ago, when we started, or 4 years ago, when we started looking at this one, we just went crazy because we cannot take any of these pictures and convert them into a system that can help the digitally an ecosystem. So that was us 4 years ago, and we said, okay, how do we address this? Number one, it is not our mandate to convince everybody that this is how the startup ecosystem is. It's the work of academia, and they know better about the topic and its intellectual, merits. And our perspective, we wanted to create a system. And so we wanted to take a practical side of these things. So the next few slides are actually going to talk about making digital sense out of those pictures that we saw. And really, we are not, again, as I said, we are not specialists in startup ecosystems. We are not academia. We are not doing deep research in these things. Our approach was more entrepreneurial, is to address this challenge. We just thought as an entrepreneur, okay? So this is what we came up with. Now, to do this, we actually interviewed more than 200, entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial experts, academic people who are in entrepreneurship, serial entrepreneurs and innovators. And we asked them a lot of questions. Now, this is not our picture, this is the business, four basic, components of services, how they create a value to entrepreneur. So this picture was that aha moment for us to say that anything that we are trying to do in the system has to be value to the entrepreneur. Now, if we take that piece of the thread, then everything would make, at least from an entrepreneurial perspective, sense. And that's what we were after, because we were after helping the entrepreneur. So you can see how it's still intangible benefits. Not all of them are very quantifiable. And, but you can see that how different pieces of services can offer help to the entrepreneur. So as an entrepreneur, you ask the question, who will help me grow? If you are an entrepreneur and you have an idea, what are you looking for? And so you will see that an entrepreneur in today's world looking for people who is going to help them in different ways, team members who are going to help them with work, mentor and advisors who are going to coach them and mentor them and guide them through, looking for investors who will provide money, looking for innovators who can come up with creative ideas to solve problems, looking for service providers who can provide cheap services, low-cost services, or services that they can get for free, or they can get better payment, conditions or terms. And they're looking for customers. So an entrepreneur walks in a meetup, and they're looking around and they're just thinking about these people. Who is an investor for me? Who is going to buy from me? Who can be good in helping me develop what I'm developing? Then you take those needs, this is the perspective of an entrepreneur, and you take that perspective and think of the entrepreneurial journey or the process of new venture creation. So the needs and the the things that entrepreneur is looking for, they substantially change as they go through this evolutionary process of their venture. So the ecosystem below that is providing services to entrepreneur at every stage of this new venture creation, considering what the entrepreneur needs are, not what the ecosystem needs are. Because a lot of time, and I have seen this and I'm guilty as charged myself, is that we need data, and we basically to make decisions at the ecosystem level, and a lot of time we end up asking for things that benefit us, our measurements, our numbers, and our things, and not about what entrepreneur is going to need. So we came up with this 9 foundation level services that can be digitized for an ecosystem that would provide that foundation, on top of which services will be offered. So if you look at your ecosystem, you will find real world twins of these things, and pieces, bits and pieces everywhere. Ecosystem directory, who is providing what services to begin with, having a roadmap to know where the weaknesses are in my ecosystem. I need to know that if there are 50 services an ecosystem should be providing, which services are not being provided. Networking and fusion of ideas, which happens all the time in different meetups and all that, that is a foundation level service. Really, nobody benefits directly from it, and everybody benefits from it. Investors network, not the investor making the decision to invest in a company, which is a commercial decision, but bringing the investors around a particular ecosystem, a community, and convincing them that this is a good community to hang around and get engaged. that is something that ecosystem, it's a foundation service. And as I said, it doesn't benefit one individual, but it benefits everyone. Similarly goes to the mentors network, the work opportunities that are being created, distributed across the board, in different ways. Co-founder opportunities, so you are setting up the networking events where entrepreneurs are going and looking for co-founders. Then there are resources, the community, meeting centers to, maker spaces. There are lots of resources if you start thinking about them. Where are they? And how to make sure that people who need those resources are connected to the resources. Events. I don't know whether you guys have experience in Minneapolis. It's very common that 2 or 3 major organizations end up having an event on the same day and in the same time at 3 different directions within the city. And there is, no way for people to basically, so having to organize those events as a community rather than just as an individual organization, individual incubator, or individual, service provider. And the last thing is trusted service providers who actually know how to work with startups, because these service providers are different from the service providers who provide services to large corporations. And building a systematic pool of these service providers is important for an ecosystem. So if you think of these pieces, the foundation level services, these are the digital foundation also for a startup ecosystem. An ideal startup ecosystem would have all these services, all these things provided digitally in addition to whatever is happening on the ground. Okay, so we took those foundation services and we started taking it to the next level, which is basically taking the people and what transactions are happening in the startup ecosystem, and how do we identify best practices for each transaction so a digital system can help facilitating the transaction. So we started looking at each piece and we started identifying where the exchange happens of the value between 2 parties. And so far we have identified more than 50 services. And for each service that we identify, we try to identify what are the best practices to transact, that service, that value. And we are creating a digital transaction base based on best practices for each of those services. Now, this is work in progress. This is where our platform becomes really, really unique. We invite everybody to kind of come and put their heads together to think about what is the best way. So for example, when you are getting a co-founder added to your team, what is the best practice to in terms of equity distribution and contractual relationship between you and the co-founder? And you must have heard horror stories of people, founders fighting with each other, companies not, I have seen one really, really promising company going into pieces because the 2 founders wouldn't agree. And the company had such a huge potential, and just because the founders had problems, the company didn't go anywhere. So what is the best practice? How do you make sure that the relationship is established in a way that everybody understands the value will be created by doing the work together, and then, have a vesting agreement that is based on the deliverables and the outcomes, and not you take 50% of the equity and I take 50% of the equity, which always tend to cause problems. Okay, So this is, those services, you can identify those services too. You can also go through the same exercise and individually identify the best practices around them. So all came together in this, picture that you can see. When you are thinking of the digital DNA, these are the components. Ideas, which basically, I don't know whether you've seen, some ideas just will keep coming back again and again, good or bad. Opportunities, which are basically ideas creating those opportunities for people. So basically, whether I will get a job or whether I will get a customer or whether I will get an investor, all those opportunities are being created. Or if I am selling, website development service, can I sell that website development service? Can I sell my legal, counsel service? And these things combined together give birth to startups that eventually either deal with the people as consumers or companies as business customers. So, they basically, startups interact with all the other, groups. And then there are networks which basically have a larger interest in many different ways in any of these, aspects of the digital structure. And this is not just digital, this is also a physical structure too around it. So when you're thinking about the digital DNA, these are like the ABCD of that DNA. Then of course, everyone is unique, every ecosystem is unique, how things are organized in that ecosystem is unique. And so but you can always take these pieces and put them, organize them based on how your ecosystem is organized. The last thing that I just wanted to convey the message to you guys, that it is always a challenge that you talk about digital augmentation of services. And a lot of people who believe in the real face-to-face conversation just feel a little bit offended or feel that, somehow it is being presented as a replacement of face-to-face. And I think that we need to be always very clear that digital and real is together meshed in our life today. And so we are only augmenting our reality with digital. And we are not saying that the reality should be replaced by digital, or we cannot also say that reality can exist now in today's world and happen without digital help. So it's something that goes hand in hand. This picture over here, people constantly using digital in the real world conversations. So I gave you a little bit of my background, the big picture, why it matters. We need to help a lot more startups, and we don't have the capacity, and digital can provide a way to to expand. Inside this startup ecosystem, there are lots of pictures, a lot of work that is going on, but it's more academic exercise, making sense from digital perspective. We have taken an entrepreneurial approach. There could be other approaches, absolutely following the same process, and can be applied in different ways. So, would love to hear your stories where you guys could think of some of the things that we talked here, or if you guys can think of other perspectives that can we bring into these pictures. So that leads to Q&A. Let's hope that you guys are bubbling with ideas.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, Hassan. That was very interesting. And there are some questions that have come in, and also people can type questions over on the side panel if they have questions for Hassan. First of all, could you share a little bit more about the software you built, the IdeaGist software, and particularly what interested me so much about it was not only did it make an ecosystem that connected all of these people together, but because the cost was so much lower to onboard a person with an idea versus versus a company that might already have to be a little farther along, or just not you have to a little higher risk to take a bet on somebody with an idea, whereas your solution made it a lot less cost to bring it on.
Yeah.
And I'm curious both how you think that might be beneficial to rural communities, and then
Absolutely.
also example of some of the communities that are successful right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, if we look at the finances of supporting a startup ecosystem, the average money from the public funding and from donations that go into the system is roughly averaging out to $35,000 per startup. That is the cost of cultivating a startup. And then you would look at it and you would realize that, a lot of that cost is happening, because there is a lot of redundancy of things that are in an ecosystem. And looking at looking at that, then some ecosystems actually try to create a digital, infrastructure around it. And a good example is here in Minneapolis. 4 years ago or 5 years ago, a group of 20 organizations in the local ecosystem came together. They put, I think at that time, committed $200,000 and then another $200,000 later to develop a online kind of a digital solution to connect everybody. And $400,000 later and 4 years later, there's nothing other than just a simple website. So this is the problem, that the ecosystems do not have money to build a system at the magnitude or the level that it is needed to, and the complexity that is behind that is needed. So we basically took that and we thought that if we can build this system that any ecosystem can use, then that would reduce the cost for everyone. So the first cost reduction from our perspective is just the initial cost of having some digital solution that brings an ecosystem together, and we have substantially lowered it. The second cost, if you think of the entrepreneur, $35,000 of the community value that is going into those startups through different helps and support systems that are existing in community. And every community is different, so there could be more or less. That money can be reduced substantially by making sure that, these services are offered, in a way that is more effective, and a lot of them can be delivered through digital means. And that also means that some of the services that may not be available locally can be brought in from outside. So giving a very simple example, if there is an entrepreneur who came up with an idea to develop a Bluetooth earring, for women, which is a true story that part of IdeaGist network, and then you don't have a Bluetooth expert in the city that you are, there may be a small community, and that Bluetooth expert must be coming from somewhere else and provide that service. So suddenly that we basically reduce the cost at the level that, when the startup is being created and they're getting the services. So the cost for a community is reduced using our platform at various different levels. So let's take examples. For example, here in Minneapolis, we started a incubator called 100 Lunches, and we started it instead of starting a big organization, big building and all that. We started it in a virtual environment. We built a community around it. And, we ran meetups on a regular basis under Rocket Network Minnesota name. And then basically created a strong community around it. And finally, it gave birth to a very strong institution, the Institute for Innovators and Entrepreneurs at Hamline University. And then it became an incubator with the space and everything. And the space was provided for free. So we got the space for free. All the events that were organized were sponsored. So really there was no penny spent. So the actual cost of taking that project from nothing to really launching an incubator and an institute with providing, a degree program, right now we have 4 credits equivalent courses in the university, which will eventually become a minor, all that with nothing. I mean, I'm over exaggerating it, but it was very little cost to the community to run this project. And I can also, we have kept track of everybody's contributions and everything. We know how many hours went into that. It's a very much simpler model to start bringing people together. And then once they feel that they're part of that project and community, then launching something on top of it. I also believe that a lot of spaces exist already. There is no need to build a new space for an incubator, and using a digital platform can substantially reduce the investment in a space. So every university has got lots of classrooms that are not used all the time. Having shared offices, which are now becoming common, can also reduce the need for creating big places for offices for these startups. So there are lots of ways that a digital system can reduce the cost for an ecosystem, and provide more support with limited resources. Now, rural communities become even more, this kind of thing becomes more valuable for rural communities. So if you remember that the average for US is 140 startups for 100,000 population. So 100,000 population is actually a big city in US. So you will see the majority of the cities are 20,000, 10,000, 30,000 kind of population range. And then when you look at it and you'll say, I will build an incubator over here, it does not make financial sense to build an incubator for 20,000 people, because for 20,000 people, the total startup potential in those 20,000 people is 28 per year. And assuming that, if with a given, current rate of like 10% of getting into incubators, you're talking about 2.8 startups, getting in an incubator. So it doesn't make sense to start an incubator. And that's where our digital solution can seriously, help smaller communities to say, you know what, we don't need a $5 million incubator. We can start with very little and have a digital incubation solution. So these are the ways how the cost, can be reduced.
That's great. Thank you. How many people do you recommend a group starts with if they wanted to create that environment, create the ecosystem? How many entrepreneurs do you think is a good start to setting up an ecosystem?
So if you see that, this is it's like, population biologists being asked the question, what is the right size of the population to maintain the genetic diversity? Okay, there is an answer to it, okay? I even know the scientist who gave the answer. But when you're looking at the startup ecosystems, sustenance of an ecosystem requires a size, a minimum size that has to be crafted based on the local situation. So let me explain this in a simple way. If there is a community of 10,000 people, let's take 10,000 as the baseline. If there's a community of 10,000 people, and I'm getting into the weeds, I know, but I think it's important to understand how you can actually do that math. So a community of 10,000 people, 2% of that community are in upper income, which would qualify as the, I'm taking national average, qualify as the, angel investors. So that means there are roughly 200 angel investors in that community. An angel investor deal size averages anywhere between $5,000 to $10,000. So you'll say like that we can generate an investment of $2 million, so 200 by 10,000. So yeah, so roughly $2 million of the capital that can be provided. So you can work backward from that and say, okay, $2 million capital, maybe matched by the government, local government and all that, another million or two, it's $4 million. The average startup in today's world, if it is a technology startup, will take anywhere between $300,000 to $400,000 minimum. So you can support 10 technology startups, coming out of that, right? So now for supporting 10 technology startups, you need at least, a few mentors, 3-4 mentors, depending on their commitment. If one mentor is committing one startup, then you need 10 mentors. And now you start building your maths to say, if I want to have a viable community, I need 200 investors who can invest $10,000 every year for making a commitment of $2 million per year. And I can support 10 entrepreneurs. Now your question is, where are the ideas and how do you cultivate those ideas and, bring some innovators, hackers who can think of, coming up with the creative solutions to continuously run the pipeline. So I suggest that people should look at financial capacity first to then decide what would be their ideal sustainable community size. But sometimes you don't have that luxury.
Yep, no, that sounds, definitely makes sense. An interesting question came in. It says, according to your experience, is there a specific new feature that the startup ecosystem needs to have in order to enhance women's participation? Or do you think men and women might need different digital services?
That's a very good question. Actually, women are so underrepresented in the startup world that it is almost surreal to go in a meetup and you see 2 women, 3 women, and the rest is all men. So we started a program. It's called Women and Innovation Network for Entrepreneurs. And Women Entrepreneurs it's only in one country right now, in Pakistan. That program went extremely well and actually connected more than 200 women entrepreneurs throughout the country that did not have an opportunity before to even talk to each other. So when you start looking at the potential of benefiting marginalized and underprivileged communities, and a digital system actually can help much better to them than the people who are already privileged and have the ability to access the resources that they need. So I believe that now the question is, how would it be different? And I think the different would be to make it your intention that this is what you want to do, and make it clear. That's the only difference. So the digital system most probably would be what you call agnostic to who is using them. But if you make it as your purpose to help help women entrepreneurs, then you will have a bigger reach and bigger impact through digital means, which may not be possible if you were just doing in a small town and say, I'm going to do that, but then you may have one or two or three. But if you take a digital platform and then spread it to the whole county, and suddenly you have a better chance.
Excellent. Thank you for that answer. I get the sense that because this platform is digital, that you could truly make a digital ecosystem around any specific type of topic. It could be around just technology or just women entrepreneurs, and still it's all digital, still be able to capitalize on reaching all those people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have another question for you. So one of the things is, first, there's just a statement, and that is, right now the economic development industry has been changing dramatically, particularly in the workforce attraction realm. Whereas before, everybody would move where the businesses went, and but even the business attraction efforts these days have a lot to do with the talent that's already in your community. Because of that, it seems there's an awful lot of shift in how people are working, and with the the gig society, if you will, something like, I recall, like 50% of millennials right now are working in the gig economy. They're either solo workers of one sort or another, like W-9 or 1099, W-2, 1099 workers. It seems to me that the nature of that and the nature of people shifting to solo working on their own really is people having their own businesses. In the nature of economic development, economic developers are counting job creation. And that seems to be shifting too, as more and more jobs go into this entrepreneurial state. But my question is, or my first statement is, it seems something like this is a new way of counting jobs in a community, because even not only are you supporting entrepreneurs now that there's so many more entrepreneurs, and so many more entrepreneurs that you want to risk supporting them, having a lower cost way of being able to support more of them really makes sense. But the second thing, and where the question ties in, is they're notoriously hard to find inside communities, especially solo workers, where they're all might be tucked away working out of their houses. They're not necessarily trotting into town and going straight to the economic development office to make themselves known. And so one of my questions was, what are some examples of successful ways that people setting up a new ecosystem make awareness of it to the community?
Yeah, well, that, of course, first of all, this is a new phenomenon, and everybody is just wrapping their heads around that. And there's something else coming, which is going to be the last few slides that I wanted to share with you guys if we had time, which are around the similar problem, which is going to be there in the next few years. And then so that challenge is there. I think the key to address that is to understand the need of that solo worker. And without offering something to them, you're not going to make them stick to the ecosystem. It's all, I mean, I try to explain this every time when we're talking about a community building, is community building happens only with the giving. It starts with the giving. And somebody has to be willing to give something to somebody who needs it. So when these 1099 workers are working their houses and they're really, that's their life, there needs to be a way of attracting them by offering something that they need. A simple service like, for example, tax preparation, which is, it sounds really basic, but pretty much every 1099 worker or a W-2 worker needs help. And so if you want to build a community, maybe that is your, it's so, and I don't know, it depends on each community, but you have to look at what do they need. And that need, so if you are a 1099 worker, the what you call uncertainty is your biggest problem. You don't know when this 1099 will end, when the next will start. So networking around, sharing the job opportunities within the community, knowing each other could be another, starting point. There are many ways that you can engage them. But that is a real thing. And some people even talking about, are they entrepreneurs? Should we consider them, and where the economic development people should be investing resources in somebody who is creating a single job, or should they be looking at, people who are actually creating wealth and larger, have a potential of creating more jobs? So there's a lot of debate. I would leave it to the economic development people to decide where it's worth it, but 1099 is a big thing.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks for your insight on that. And my thought is every big business starts with a single job created. So that's the nature of the entrepreneurs. Well, now that I found out you've got some hidden slides, I'd love to let you wrap up the hour.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. And you can send me questions afterwards also. More than happy to field them. I normally respond fairly quickly. I wanted to share with you just a few more slides why it is important to look at the digital DNA of a startup ecosystem, and why it is important to understand how these digital systems would work. Because there are technologies which are disrupting at an unprecedented, spelling is wrong, please ignore that, speed and magnitude. And that speed and magnitude had never happened in the human history. On the screen, you're seeing 6 emerging technologies which are selected that basically are growing at a speed like nobody can believe it. And that really means, the disruption that is happening is completely out of control, and even more so for the smaller communities. Those do not have the resources. But these technologies are going to create $50 trillion economy in the next 10 years. And not all 49 of the technologies that we are tracking, only 7 of them that we picked as the key emerging technologies are going to create $50 trillion opportunity. Unfortunately, smaller communities and smaller areas are going to be at disadvantage, because either talent is going to fly or ideas are going to fly out of their area, and the bigger cities would become just the magnets to get these these technologies and the benefits. The technologies are 3D printing, artificial intelligence, VR, blockchain, intelligent vehicles, Internet of Things, and smart robots. Now you can see cloud and e-commerce is nowhere there. And a lot of economic development people believe that e-commerce and cloud is still a big opportunity, but really that is yesterday's. The bigger opportunity that is knocking at the door is these technologies. So it's basically everybody is racing, and some have these Formula One cars, and some are running in their maybe old 3-cylinder car, and that a disadvantage that we would like to change. And we would like to offer some help to underserved and underprivileged communities with these technologies under our program called Emerging Technology Accelerators. And if you are interested in, learning more about how this could help you and your community, please send me an email, or you can talk to Aaron, and we are working with Golden Shell Agency to actually come up with a program that we can offer, these packages directly to you guys. So my email address is hassan@ideagist.com. And you have Aaron's email address too. So please send us your thoughts.
thank you so much, Hassan, for being our guest today and sharing everything about the IdeaGist and the virtual accelerators. Fantastic presentation. This presentation has been recorded, and we will be putting it also on our website at goldenshovelagency.com. So you could check out the webinars there and any of our past recordings and watch those as well. So feel free, like Hassan said, to email him directly or get in touch with anyone on our team, and we'll connect you. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on a webinar coming up in January.
Thank you all.